So we're gonna start this You cannot hear properly in the room, is that so? Can you hear me properly now? Great. So we start again this afternoon with what we know. So we are going to share with all our colleagues, with all the information and the questions asked by means of internet. And then we have Father Jacob and a representative from Europe, the reflectors, which will make an introduction, a brief introduction, just 5 minutes, and then we open the debate. Okay, good afternoon. We have had a special sensitivity thanks to the speech of Father Peter. And we have more than 1,000 fans. For those who are not yet there, we invite them to join us. I think that the experience of Brazil has been very interesting. A group of people have gathered in order to follow live all the debates through streaming, and they have also left their comments on the internet. Let's see some of the comments that they have made. To educate for compassion and for sensitivity. That's why human people that have to face this world of individualism, they can overcome the situation. This ideal of compassionate person is a reference to the person of Jesus. But they can be sheep without a shepherd. What Peter McBarry was saying involves everyone in the education community, teachers, parents, students. This communication is really demanding and needs for people to be involved. In Barcelona, there were people that said spirituality gives a lot of depth. It is very important to really accompany insertion experiences and to look for people to accompany in these experiences. Also, at a certain point in time in the debate, we were talking about the relation to the student. We have to avoid the student to become a kind of client or customers. We have to mobilize his or her compassion, and therefore we have to get out of the comfort zone. Finally, in social networks, this is the reflection that we have seen. Global incidents, individual reflection. I think that we have to reflect upon these ideas. Thank you. So now Father Sanet Jacob has the floor.
Good evening to all. I am coming from a land of great spiritual men and women. Be it Buddha or Gandhi or Ramakrishna or even Mother Teresa. All these people had wonderful affective experience that transformed them. And today when I was listening to the talk of Father McBarry, I am convinced that he was deeply touched, affectively touched and transformed, and that produced the work which he is doing. And the whole presentation of his paper on the compassionate person had various dimensions. It was rooted in many aspects. A few of them I will just mention. His talk was deeply rooted in his personal experience. It was also rooted in his love of God and love for his people. It was rooted in GC 32 of the documents of the society. It was also deeply touched, rooted in the spiritual exercises. It was also based on the gospel, especially Matthew 25. It was also very much deeply rooted in the social teachings of the Catholic Church. It was also a product of his deep conviction. And also, I believe that it is rooted in the goal, educational goal of the Society of Jesus. His experiences in Ireland is the reality of the world. It can be appealed in the universal level. And what are the important aspects which we can highlight and we can reflect upon? He started the talk with 3 questions. And these 3 questions, I recapitulate once again for us, is very, very important for us. First one is, what do we mean by person of compassion? The word solidarity can be replaced here instead of compassion. Okay. How do we make person of compassion? What are the consequences of person of compassion or person of solidarity? Producing compassionate people is a profound challenge in today's world. And what's the definition of compassion? The definition of compassion is feeling of distress of the plight of the suffering of another human being, which impels us to do something concretely and immediately to alleviate that suffering. In other words, in tune with the spiritual exercises, moved out of love, we serve God and people. That's the whole purpose of spiritual exercises. Spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius is not an intellectual or rational work. It is aiming at the result for an individual to have an affective understanding. That's why I began with the names of great spiritual men of our nation. And he also mentioned us about the importance of human dignity. Depriving one from the basic needs, in the sociological terms we can take as Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first need. If we deprive the people from this, we are taking away their dignity as human beings. So therefore, Jesuit education is transmission of a dream. What's that dream? It's a dream of Jesus. It's a dream of God. No one is supposed to be deprived. We say, our own motto is that Jesuit school is, the world is our home. In that home, powerful images is brought up for us. First one is that in a house of 4, 3 have been deprived of basic necessities, and 1 is given everything. St. Ignatius will say, love is shown in our deeds than in our words. In fact, look at the root causes. That's another point he brought for us to reflect. Root causes rather than the symptoms. That's in Pope Francis also says the same thing. Insertion programs must enable the students to see, judge, and act upon. That means befriending the poor is more important than making them a recipient of your generosity, our generosity. He quotes from Gaudium et Spes, the joys and the hopes, the grief and the anxieties of the people of this age, poor and afflicted, These are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Father again talked about the constructive anger and changes, etc. And he also brought the various aspects of compassion. A compassionate love we have, it may produce two results. One is charity, another one is much more deeper, finding the root cause and treating it. He also said, in order to make or in order to produce compassionate or students with solidarity, we need to have that framework created in the teachers and the board, whatever it is, headmasters and principals and people who are in authority. Because unless we have teachers with compassion, we cannot produce students with compassion. A teacher is the one, yes, and ending it, a teacher is the one who finds the way, shows the way, and walks the way. So walk the talk is very important. And finally, the last point for us to reflect is, I come back to what Father Messa started with, for us to reflect. This will make us, motivate us to think, what new kind of life is this upon which I am entering? Thank you.
Gracias, Padre. Magitejes, por favor.
Thank you very much, Father. Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes o buenos días, buenas noches, depende de dónde esté cada cual.
Is it working? It was to me like a coin with two faces. On the one hand, constructive anger, colère, rabia. Anger that could be heard on Father McVeary's talk, in Father McVeary's talk, and how this made him act for justice. Anger in some of your questions, saying poor education perpetrates poverty. Anger because the staff in some of our schools doesn't seem to be involved in the social programs we believe in. Anger because the 4 C's should not be disconnected, should not be dissociated, but fully integrated as a way to link ourselves to each other. Anger because we can't control everything, because it will always be mysterious. We don't know how we can make people understand that poverty is a reality next door. Anger, again, because in some places, like in India, in Africa, but in France too, we have a long way to go. We know we have to go to the roots. We have to be bridge builders, as the image this morning. But it seems so difficult. There are so many obstacles to influence social policies that we could be tempted to give up. Last hunger, but that's a joke, because I don't want the Irish delegate to resign. But the other face of the coin can make us change glasses, can bring us hope. Someone said to me, the Spirit was here this morning. The other face of the coin is gratitude. Gratitude for the witness we have heard this morning with Father McVeary, for his moving presence. Gratitude for the little seeds that were the two experiences in Tennessee, in Tijuana. Seeds that we could also plant in our gardens. The 4 pillars Joe mentioned: community, simplicity, prayer, service. They could also be our feuille de route. gratitude for the experience in Colombia. So original, since you start with a very young one, 4 to 7. Gratitude for being able to reflect upon this here in Manresa, following St. Ignatius. Gratitude for realizing that in our schools, in our centers, we can still take the freedom to improve, to influence the Ignatian way of proceeding. And I think that if the déjà vu can be boring, well, it can also be reassuring if we change glasses, if we really believe a better world is still possible today in our new context. So let's focus on gratitude, because if we are here from all over the world, it is because we want to change things at our level, of course, step by step, so that our students, ourselves, will not slip down into the river, but we will go on dreaming God's dream. Thank you.
Gracias, Majitejes. Gracias a todos. Abrimos entonces.
Thank you very much. I would like to propose you the following. In fact, I thought this summary has been really great, this dialectic of seeing both sides of the same coin. I think this idea really is great. So I borrow also that idea, and I would like you to now just take a few minutes and very freely just to write down what comes to your mind, to your hearts. I mean, if we analyze what we do, each one from his or her place, what do we feel facing these challenges of the context, and also the appeal of the society of Jesus with the education? How do we feel that anger we were talking about, and what provokes also this attitude of gratitude? So let's take a few minutes and then we start right away the discussion. Thank you.
Vamos a ver si podemos hacer.
Let's see whether we can share now all this information, which is gonna give us some work to start. Then we will open the discussion, and please, someone can help maybe with the mic. So we are gonna do the following. First of all, just 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The microphone will just turn around because it's important to speak on the mic for everyone to be able to follow. And we will listen to very short sentences, words, in order to share what are the notes that you took, what really provokes this anger to you. So please just raise your hands if you wish. The mic will be passed on to you, and so you will be able to share these experiences with us. And we listen. We just listen without discussion right now. So what does provoke anger to us?
Canada. I think the thing that struck me, and it's partly dealing with that conflict that I was feeling earlier, is that the gratitude comes from that deep sense of the love of God for the person, for me. And I think when we talk about the dream of Jesus, we might be framing it and missing something. And what we're missing is that that's the dream, that every person in the world realizes that dignity that comes from that love that God has for them and calling them out of nothing. So where does the anger go? The anger goes to anything that becomes an obstacle to someone recognizing their love, the love that they have and the dignity that they have. And so what is that? Radical poverty, but it's also materialism. It's also anything that stops me from recognizing that I'm loved. And that's what we need to be focusing on and working on in our schools.
Vilma?
Personal.
A personal comment. Sometimes it's easy to talk to others, but it's difficult to talk to oneself. I feel anger to myself because sometimes I feel indifference, because I do not act enough, and because very often I do the good that I do the evil that I don't want to, and I stop doing the good I would like to do.
Service brings our students into the lives of other people, and we hope that that deepens their compassion and expands their self-understanding to include the others. And we also hope it brings them to ask the question why the conditions of injustice exist, and evoking in them a righteous anger. And I think it's important that that righteous anger not devolve into cynicism. And so I believe we need to teach them the skills of advocacy, how to organize, how to petition, how to approach a congressman, how to create a website, how to be advocates. They need to learn the tools. It's one thing for just to reflect on the experience, to feel the compassion, to feel the righteous anger, but we need to give them the tools and the skills to be advocates.
¿Alguien más que quiera compartir qué le produce indignación?
Someone else want to share what does provoke anger? I feel anger when I see that people that know what they have to do, they don't do it.
Anger is, for me, as I was reflecting of, in terms of compassion, what are we doing? Is what we are doing is right, and what the other people are doing, how can I relate it to what I'm doing? But I realize this is a wrong reflection, and this is what brings anger, because what I got from today is where the Spirit moves you, as someone who went through spiritual exercises, what is your response to what God gave you to experience? And I think this can specify the type of compassion we can show or we can teach. Thank you.
Bueno, pasamos al otro lado de la moneda.
Let's see the other side of the coin. If you allow me to do so, I'm gonna leave. So the first thing I wrote down in my notes is that I would like to say thank you. Thank you for this present of Ignatian spirituality. To me, this has given me the opportunity to look at things in a very different way as I did before, as the gospel or my previous years. So thank you, first of all. And who else would like to talk? Now we go into the discussion to know, not the discussion really, we want to know what are you saying thanks to. For the 5 loaves of bread and the fishes.
Story, slight, very small point to make. Right before I came over, and it reminded me in hearing this talk, I had a discussion with an older gentleman who, at this age, owes nobody anything in the world, you know, and he had founded 4 other schools, and he himself had been a man who had been had a lot of power originally, and then went through a lot of very hard times in his life, alcoholism, etc., and kind of crashed. It was after that he actually founded these schools. So he came into my office, as I see him frequently, just to talk, and he said to me, he was angry with his brother, very angry with his brother. His brother is also well known in the city. His brother is healthy and handsome. He said, and has a lot of influence partly not his own, partly from his own family's history in the city. He said, he was angry because he had gone to ask his brother for some more money for another school, and his brother wouldn't even listen to him. What was remarkable for me was watching this man change that anger into something else. What he said to me, he said, you know, he's had everything. He is healthy. He's been handsome. He's got influence beyond his own experience. He said, the poor man. He said, he's never experienced suffering in his life. He said, as a result, he said, he's very lonely. I thought it was a fascinating thing. That's it.
Gracias, Ben. Hay 2 personas que se...
I think 2 more people are asking the floor.
The talk in the morning and the reflections really challenged me in the sense that I'm trying to do something similar with my schools back in Zimbabwe, but I also realize the danger that the anger has to be managed, especially if you're in a country like Zimbabwe where the government do not tolerate people ask questions. You don't want to expose the students. You don't want them to go back or go in the streets and, you know, chant down and all these things. You want them to be angry, but you want to manage that anger very carefully. And I'm trying to implement education for justice in the school, in Jesuit schools in the country. And this is the balance I'm seeking to do that. I will do it, but I'm also aware of the dangers that I can present to the students.
Gracias.
Sí. Luis Tarín
from Barcelona. I'd like to say thank you for a message that I have received just a few hours ago. It says, Luis, I write to you in order to explain you a very good experience of today. This year in the school we have a project that is to reflect and to work so that the compassionate action is not just a very punctual thing, but something integrated in the process, in the learning process for students and for the life of a school, with the participation of all the community. Thank you, Luis.
Aquí tenemos uno y...
The mic, please. There is someone asking for the floor here and someone in the back.
Examples we heard today is the importance of sharing, and I feel very grateful when in my school there is a possibility to share, whether it is between students or between parents or between teachers. And I notice sometimes students do not have the chance to share their story, and sharing is a way of affirmating them, of proving them their story is important to be heard and to be told. And it's not just about, stories about poverty, but it's also stories about other kinds of suffering, about being lonely and being depressed and coming from broken families and all kinds of experiences of suffering. So I feel very grateful whenever we have the opportunity to share with each other.
Gracias. Enrique, y después yo, y después aquí adelante. Y tú tienes el micrófono.
You have a mic? Enrique, do you have the mic? And then you hand it to Montserrat, please. I would like to say thank you, and I've been saying thank you all day long for that Jesuit who had a child named Enrique, and when he was 8 years old, he learned that poverty is not just a sociological reality, but something that includes names and surnames, and so that affected myself, indeed. So that was the Enrique, and that was the beginning of my story. So that's why I would like to thank you to our masters and to all the people that have preceded us. I would like to say thank you for the 30 years that Jesus lived in Nazareth. No one asked him what he was doing. No one told him what to do. While as long as in our schools we create experiences that allow for children to understand that love, and we create an educational system for students to discover their real vocation, their inner vocation, I think that this will become true. I mean, this is the path on the way to follow. Thank you very much. And there is something in the back, I think, asking for the mic.
I thank for the inspiring message I have been constantly receiving. I'm really angry with me. With me. And most of us we feel sensitive to the feelings of the poor and everybody, but we don't act on it. I don't.
Thanks, gracias.
Thank you. The mic is coming over.
Peter's challenge. He gave us 10 years for our schools to be inclusive. And I think there's two dimensions to that. One is who is admitted to our schools. Does it reflect the social mix that actually exists out there in the world? And secondly, the students that leave our schools, do they leave with the kind of qualities that Peter has been talking about? People who agitate, who advocate for those who are weak and marginalized, and people who are players when it comes to policy. I think that would be a wonderful challenge for all of us to embrace, to those two aspects. Maybe, of course, I'm just looking for a 10-year extension to my contract. I don't know.
Gracias. ¿Tenemos el micrófono en algún lado, no?
We have the mic somewhere now. Father Peter McVery, please.
Just a word about the anger. I think when they say when you're 20 you want to change the world. When you're 40 you just want to change those around you. And when you're 60 you just want to change yourself. So when talking about the anger, I think we're talking here about getting our students to be in solidarity with people in need. I think we also have to look at ourselves. We have to look at our own lifestyles and our own complicity in the inequalities that exist in our worlds and in our societies. So I think we have to direct some of that anger into ourselves as well, not calling it anger, but calling it responsibility, a responsibility for doing something. One of the things I would say to groups often when I'm talking to them, the Gospels talk about giving up everything and, selling all your possessions and come follow me. We can't do that today, obviously, not in that same way. But I would say, to come close to what the Gospel is asking us, the slogan I would use is live very simply, share very generously. And I think we have to take that on board for ourselves and our own lifestyles.
Thank you. Gracias, Father. Ahí al lado ya tiene alguien que pide el micrófono.
Yes, do we have more people asking for the microphone?
Yeah. Can I tell you just a brief story? Very brief, which is what stories are, building bridges between my experience and yours. At the beginning of last year, the Australian province opened a small primary school in inner Sydney, in Redfern, for Indigenous families. It's very small, only about 20 students. And Father Ross, in fact, was one of the initiators of this project. Excuse me, very difficult project, working with very disadvantaged people. But on the board, I sit on the board, and on the board is one of the Indigenous people, Auntie Beryl's her name, and she said to me one day, Father Chris, she said, you have given us the great gift of education. We should never underestimate the gift that we offer our people through our schools.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Maybe the first day or the second day here, somebody said in our schools we should encourage our students to move from too much pride in their school and too much pride in their achievement, but to think more about gratitude. And now today we have come back to that same word. And it reminds me of one of Ignatius's letters. I forget who he was writing to, but he said to the person, do you know what the greatest sin is? And I often ask that question of the students at the school, and their minds are thinking of, murder, plunder, exploitation, torture in the time of Ignatius. And he says to this person he's writing to, the greatest sin is ingratitude. And I've just sat with that statement very often and put it before the boys. I'm not quite sure exactly what Ignatius means, but perhaps if we're not grateful, then we are too self-centered and self-referenced and self-serving. But in our Ignatian tradition, I think it's a great question to take out of Ignatius's correspondence and sit with.
A Julio aquí adelante. Yo estaba esperando.
Yes, Joe first and then Julio.
Carver from the United States. I wrote this in our time of reflecting. Christ did not come into the world to provide protection against suffering, disappointment, and death. In his earthly life, indeed, he experienced all of these things. Our spiritual life is so often a call to active participation in all of these things so that we might recognize his face in the very least, because our salvation is bound up with theirs.
Gracias, Joe. Julio.
Julio. Julio from Argentina. Both this act of thanking and anger related to persons who are 60 or 70 or 80 years old. Well, sometimes it makes me not feel very happy, especially when I encounter persons who are older than I am and live basing everything on complaints and criticism and just complaining all the time. But then on the other hand, I am very grateful when those of us in young generations are able to look up to our elderly and see them enthusiastic, committed, and with a young spirit in the evangelical sense of the term. And I think today we really have listened to a very, very young witness. So thank you. Thank you, Julio. Well, if I feel this properly, I think we deserve 5 added minutes for our group work. So I guess the best thing is that we start organizing this into the working groups. So remember, from 4 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we have group work. Then there's a short pause, and then at 5:15 we come back. and we will be listening to the persons of each group that helped towards the summary. So we have 2 questions to answer. First, what should we improve upon for our education to still go into depth regarding compassion that eventually becomes solidarity? Second question, how can we think about relationships and tensions regarding the education of a conscious or a person of conscience who is also competent and compassionate on the basis of the discussions and reflections that have been taking place these days? As we did in the other 2 intense seminar days, well, every group has a representative, and then they should have some rounds for discussion, and eventually a few minutes before it ends, for the secretary to be able to have the summary, do decide which of the 2 questions you want to work on, and remember, 5:15 we meet again. So good work to you all. At 5:15 we meet again in this room. Thank you.